Most of us now go to work, and what the company's really paying for is our ability to think, whether that's knowledge, whether that's judgment, whether that's a particular expertise. Most people we deal with anyway, in the kind of working industrial world, the office-based world, are in what I would call a cognitive-based role as opposed to a task-based role.
The question is from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Ricky from Thinking Focus.
Hi, I'm Paul from Thinking Focus.
And today, the question is why carrot and stick are no longer relevant. So why is that, Paul? Why are they no longer relevant?
Yeah, well, there's kind of a longer story to that. So can I just give some background first? Because I think it's going to help explain it. So by carrot and stick, we mean punish and reward. And it's not they're no longer relevant, but it's that in a modern way we work, in modern businesses, they're not really the most ideal tools anymore. So let's go back in time a little bit. This kind of idea of punish and reward as a motivational theory, that came really popular, I guess, probably in the middle of the last century. And if you think about it, a lot of the kind of academics, a lot of the big thinkers about how work should be organized were probably people who were quite senior in military at the end of World War II. They'd come out of the army, they'd gone into academia, they'd started thinking about how we organize the world. And most people at that time did jobs that I'm going to call task-based roles. So we weren't paying people to rock up and think about what they did. A la the military. You didn't have a group of soldiers who went, oh, let me have a think about this. There might be a better way. It's, we're going here, we're doing that. You will work in this particular way.
So this would have been like your production lines. Obviously, the automotive sector was starting to boom at that time, I would have thought as well. Certainly going into the 50s.
Well, manufacturing generally, in any kind of way, shape and form. So I think in the UK, there'd have been automotive, but there would have been clothing. Basically, all the stuff we've got rid of in the last 30 years.
Oh, right. Okay.
Would have been, and most people worked in what let's call it a task-based role. So I'm paying you for your labor. I'm not paying you for your brain. I want your physicality. I want you to press buttons or do things. And maybe you were highly skilled, but it was doing the same thing over and over again. At which point I'm going to reward you in certain ways. So maybe I reward you in a piecework. So you're more of X you produce, the more I'll pay you. Or I'm going to punish you. If you don't do X, I will do Y to you. So very simple kind of management philosophy on how to get the best out of your employees.
And I imagine in that kind of arena, that task-based approach, that can be quite powerful.
It can be. And if you think about today, so we're saying, why is it no longer relevant? There are still roles around, quite significant roles around, that are probably task-based. I always think about this if you take sales as an example. At one end of the spectrum, we are paying salespeople to be very clever, relationship builders, consultants, work in a particular way. That's not a task-based role. But at the other end of the spectrum, there are still sales roles where it's about the volume of calls. Make enough calls, say the script in a particular way. If you make enough calls off the list, you will sell enough.
So that's a numbers game then, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's a task-based role. Please don't think, just follow the process, and that's the modern day equivalent in some ways of sit here and press the button when every widget goes past.
So I imagine that obviously we've kind of led into this with why carrot and stick are no longer relevant. And of course, like you've said, there are some examples where it might still be appropriate, but
very few. And that's the point why it's no longer relevant.
Exactly.
So most of us now go to work, and what the company's really paying for is our ability to think, whether that's knowledge, whether that's judgment, whether that's a particular expertise. Most people we deal with anyway, in the kind of working industrial world, the office-based world, are in what I would call a cognitive-based role as opposed to a task-based role. I'm not paying you to be there to press a button. I'm paying you to actually do something different, to think about it.
And I suppose then that's where Dan Pink and his book Drive has kind of popularized perhaps a different approach. He talks about the three things of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I'm sure that's built on other research.
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, the sort of core research that undersits that is some research from the mid-'80s. I think it's 1985, but I'd have to check that. Edward DC, Richard Ryan, so DC and Ryan's research. And where they started looking at was the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So carrot and stick is an extrinsic form of motivation. You are being controlled from the outside. Somebody else comes up with the rewards, somebody else comes up with the punishment. And what they started to realize is for a lot of roles, for a lot of the way people work, that's not enough. Because it's, in sense, what they're doing is they're controlling you. So it's a very kind of controlled based motivation theory. And let's take the salesperson again. You can control a bright, capable, account director type character to a certain extent. You can say you will do this, that, or the other. But the reality is those people's roles mean that the majority of the time they're not in front of you. And if you're controlling them, and it's a bit like the carrot and stick stuff, they're going to work within the reward and the punishment framework that you set up. So we've seen this again. You and I have worked on clients where they're heavily into their stick-based reward structure. And yes, it stops people doing stuff, but it doesn't make people do stuff. They do the bare minimum not to get hit with a stick.
Yeah, just enough.
Just enough. We also work where there's amazing rewards on offer. The problem is the rewards aren't really that satisfying. So firstly, you have two issues with the carrot. One is, if I don't think I'm going to get the carrot, I stop. So the second the carrot's not there, why would I work? And we've seen this. There's been amazing research around this, where they've done things like take children and get them to sit in a classroom and draw creative pictures. And some of the kids, they pay for every picture they produce. And the other kids, they just say thank you and stick them on the wall. And what you see really, really quickly is the kids that get paid stop enjoying drawing.
Because now it's a chore.
It's a chore, it's a task. And if I'm not getting paid for it, why would I do it? Whereas the kids who are getting praise and rewarding in a very different way, it's just thank you, it's great fun, it's a relaxing activity. They're intrinsically motivated. The desire to do it is coming from within. And so it's that intrinsic motivation that drives this kind of stronger behavior. So what DC and Ryan were looking at is, well, what drives intrinsic motivation? And their theory is a thing known as self-determination theory. And it's, like I say, it's been around since the 80s. And they talk about three factors, and it's subtly different from Dan Pink. And this is where it gets really interesting for you and I to think about. So what DC and Ryan came up with was autonomy, same as Pink. They call competence, which is basically mastery, same as Pink. But the third point they talk about is relatedness. Now, they're really talking about connection to the group, connection to others. We are motivated by that sense of belonging, that sense of being part of the team. Pink's tweaked that, and he's gone with purpose. Now, I can see it can be either, because human beings are highly driven by purpose. And often being aligned to the purpose, knowing why we're here, actually connects us to the group. It bonds us to the group. So purpose creates relatedness anyway.
Yeah.
But I always think it's kind of interesting to go, and I've no real view on this, but both work in this sense, because I've worked with teams and we've talked about it as purpose, and where higher purpose exists, that really works really well, that people are motivated by why we're here and what we're trying to achieve.
Well, you can see that, can't you? When people, like for charities in the high street, and they're trying to get you to sign up for a monthly donation, they're doing that because they kind of connect with the purpose of the charity.
Yes.
People give their time freely on additional projects that interest them.
Yes, but it's also the relatedness of that as well. So you think about where people give that time up for additional projects. What they're doing is becoming part of that group as well. So I think both of these things kind of intersect here. But it is these three things. Whether we go with purpose or relatedness is kind of almost neither here nor there. It's these three underlying factors that drive intrinsic motivation.
So tell me a bit about autonomy then. What does that mean in real terms?
In simple terms, autonomy means control. So we talked about the carrot and stick being a controlled motivational style, i.e. somebody else is calling the shots, so driving my behavior. Well, in intrinsic motivation, it's coming from within. So autonomy means actually my ability to control. So think of a couple of things here, right? So one is, do I have a say? Do I have a voice? do I get to choose the way I work, choose the things I focus on? And there's clearly going to be limits to that. I'm not going to go into the office every day and get to pick from anything. But within the list of things that I can pick from, how much choice is mine? Do I get to, I'm going to use sales as an example, do I get to pick the order of the customers or select which customer I visit? Do I get to choose where I sit in the office or where I work with, or which projects I prioritize today or tomorrow? That's what we mean by autonomy. And clearly, autonomy, the flip side of autonomy is accountability. You can't have autonomy unless you're accountable for your outcomes.
That's really interesting because, we work with organizations all the time, and quite often there is this perception or belief that there is autonomy, but the line managers don't just tell them what the kind of headline goal is, they also tell them how they'd like it to be done. So they almost are prescribing that, and that actually is not certainly not autonomy, but it's worse because you're kind of going, yeah, you think you've got the freedom, but you haven't, because I'm telling you what I want, how I want it, and when I want it by.
Yes, and that's actually demotivating. So what you're actually saying to somebody is you're in control, and very often there. And again, if you think about that autonomy and accountability, which I always think are two sides of the same coin almost. They're basically saying you have the accountability side, but I'd like to tell you how to do it. So you're responsible for the outcome, but I'm going to control the way you're doing it. Well, that's not motivating at all. That's one of the most demotivating things you can do to another human being.
And it's really hard to achieve when you're both judge, jury, executioner, well, all three rather, judge, jury, executioner, in terms of how the goal has played out, how it's been delivered, achieved.
And you see, think about a classic example of that, where you have a manager going, well, I want you to do it this way. I'm overruling you. I'm the boss. We're doing it this way. What's the first thing that happens? You go, fine, I'm doing it your way, but it's on your head. The second thing that happens is, if you keep doing this, why would I want to work here? Because there's nothing in it for me. I've got no control over this. I've got no ability to shine, to organize in a way that works for me. And this comes down, I think, to a certain extent, to individual difference, that each of us has a slightly different makeup in the way we like to think about the world, the way we like to interact with the world. And if we're allowed to then choose to work in a way and organize in a way and structure ourselves in a way that matches that individual difference. So if I get to work in a way that suits me, I'll get into a state of flow. It won't feel like hard work at all. If I'm doing it in a way that suits my manager, who may not have the same personality traits as me, may not want to organize or work in the same way as me, then it's going to feel really hard. It's going to feel really challenging and difficult, because I'm going to have to work harder, because I'm going to have to adapt who I am to that situation.
And it's even worse if I don't think your way is right.
Or more to the point, if I don't have the skills or the ability to do it your way, or I can see that I have skills and abilities that you don't have, which means I could do it in a way that may be quicker, faster, better, more productive. And that's what we mean by autonomy, which is how much control, how much choice do I have in this situation. And what's really interesting, these autonomy, mastery, and or competence and relatedness are highly connected to also a resilience theory. So there's some other theories. I think it's Maddie and Cabasa who talk about hardiness. It's the same three traits. These are the things that make us strong in the workplace. So not only motivational, but they keep us going as well. So we take away autonomy for the people who work for us. We don't allow them to have control over things. Then we actually reduce their ability. We reduce their resilience, their hardiness to do the work in the first place. So they're not as robust and capable. And eventually, actually, control or autonomy to a certain extent, again, in sort of change theory, comes up as one of those factors that when we feel completely out of control, when we have nowhere else to go because we're being controlled, typically we resist.
Yeah. And you can see that when we do a lot of the work that we do with our clients, we do these kind of challenges, don't we? So part of that is the senior team, the sponsors, if you like, they're the ones that get to determine kind of the high level what, but we tell them that they cannot get involved in terms of the how. That's for the group to choose. We give them permission effectively to go and explore how they might go and achieve the goal, the ultimate goal for the organization.
Yeah, and I mean that's a really good example, which is, you know, clearly there has to be limits on autonomy. I can't work in a big organization and just make every decision for myself and work in my own way. I have to work within the group, I have to work with other people, and I have to be aligned to the larger objectives of the organization. But beyond that, why would you need to control me? If you've hired me because I have a brain and I'm doing some cognitive work that I'm uniquely suited to, surely giving me the choice about how that work's done is the smartest move.
Well, it's kind of pointless employing the expert and then telling them how to do it, isn't it?
Pointless, but very common, sadly.
Yeah, a bit very costly as well, because you're not getting the benefit out of what you're paying for.
Yeah. And I think autonomy for me is one of those things where you go, it takes some trust, it takes some confidence from a manager, but to allow people to make that choice for themselves is so empowering and so motivating that it connects that person to you and the organization. And I think I felt it, I'm sure you have in your career, when you work for a manager that empowers you in that way, and what they're really doing is playing into this autonomous part of the intrinsic motivation, you're really loyal. You really want to stick with them because it feels really good.
Yeah. So tell me about mastery then. What's that all about? Or competence, as you said.
Yeah, so simple answer. So there's two sides to this for me. So the sort of pink side of mastery is, am I better tomorrow than I was today? Can I learn? Can I grow from this job? If I take the DC and Ryan, competence goes a little bit wider and says, can I do the job? So, intrinsic motivation, if I put somebody in a role they can't do, they're not competent for it, that's demotivating. So if I've got the skills or the training and the support and the environment and the tools and all the other things that make up competence, then I'm going to be highly motivated. If I'm put in a position where I don't have the skills, I don't have the training or the systems or the tools or access to the right people or whatever it is I need to do the role, then that's going to be massively demotivating.
So this probably leads into one of your favourite expressions and terms, the Goldilocks effect, isn't it?
Yeah. So and what we mean by that is, I want to work on things that are not too easy and not too hard. They're just right. It's a baby bear, I think. So that's why I want to be baby bear. There's my confession. And because if it's too hard, if from a competence point or a mastery point, it's so hard I can't succeed, I'm not going to find that motivating. In fact, I'm probably going to find it scary and I'm going to want to run away. But if it's too easy, if it's boring and it's dull and I can do it standing in my head, I'm going to do that for a while. I might get away with doing a couple of hours of really mundane work, admin. We all do that in every role. But if that's all day, every day, that's going to be demotivated. So competence is about, or mastery is about saying, do I stand a chance of doing this? But also at the same time, can I be slightly better? Is it just a little bit more difficult and a little bit more challenging so I can grow as a human being and be slightly better tomorrow than I was today?
So purpose then, we talked a bit about purpose or this relatedness as you described it from that.
DC and Ryan. Yeah.
So give us a little flavour of purpose then, or relatedness.
And again, very sort of, I think, are very intertwined. You can see how these two things link together. So again, Pink, what he's talking about in purpose is a deep understanding, a connectedness to what we're trying to do. And that could be the people that we're trying to work with. It could be the thing that we're trying to achieve. So having an understanding, a belief, and I guess a buy-in to what we're doing is meaningful is highly motivating. So again, think about that. Think about us, for example, when we set this business up, how motivated were we by the purpose? And it didn't matter that there was naysayers. It didn't matter that people told us, you don't understand, setting a business up is really hard. None of that mattered because we had a very clear purpose. We knew exactly what we were trying to achieve. That's highly motivating, and it's an intrinsic motivation. It comes from us. No one was saying you have to do this. In fact, most people were saying, don't do this. It's really risky. We were saying, no, we have to do this. It means something to us. So you play that back into an organization. And this is where purpose, I think, gets trickier, particularly in a large organization. Most people we work with in very large organizations, when you say what's the purpose of your team, they can't really tell you. What you'll get is an answer that's like 5 or 6 levels up. They'll tell you what the purpose of the organization is. And you go, that's great, but what's the golden thread that joins you and what you're trying to do to that? And do you believe in that? Do you believe that that purpose is worthwhile, that actually you can achieve it, that it's going to make a real difference? Because the second you do, that's going to be highly motivating. You take the relatedness side of that, and again, all links together, and you're really saying, and do you buy into this group of people? Do you want to be part of this group? Do you want to identify with this group? And again, that's why a lot of great companies create very loyal employees, because they create a tribe. They create a relatedness of every individual employee to that tribe.
A purpose is fundamental to that tribe as well, isn't it? That's the glue that holds them together. We're in this because it's the reason why we stand on a high street and collect donations for charities. It's the reason why we put discretionary effort into projects that are outside of our normal kind of working time,
Yeah, and it's the reason why, you might have company logo T-shirts and, all of the other stuff, all the trappings of being part of a tribe that is an organization that's doing something that's meaningful. And I think the sort of the key bit for me here is it's got to be meaningful to you. I've worked, as you know, in a couple of sectors that other people go, ooh, how could you do that? And it's like, but it was meaningful to me at the time, and possibly not for the reasons that you think it is. So it was meaningful to me because of what we were trying to do with the technology and what we were trying to do with that business. Maybe not necessarily I connected to actually the outcome of the business and the products in any way, shape, or form. So it's got to be meaningful to that individual, and that's the really important thing. And so when these three things come together, when you've got people who have a sense of control, they feel they can make a difference in their environment. They feel like they're going to be pushed and they're going to grow. It's not going to be comfortable, but it's not going to be impossible. And they buy into why they're doing it. It's worth the hardship. So autonomy, mastery, and purpose come together. Then they're motivated from within. You don't have to be there as a manager to make sure it happens. They're going to make sure it happens because they care about it.
And I imagine conversely, where one of those is not quite right, then that can have a detrimental effect as well. So, giving me the freedom to grow and learn, giving me something purposeful to connect with, but then telling me how to do it can be very demotivating, in the same way that you create autonomy with purpose, but then limit my opportunity to grow and develop and accomplish stuff and stretch myself in that process.
I agree. I think you need it's the combination of these three things that create that intrinsic motivation and drive somebody forward. And what we see a lot of the time is where that can't happen, where one of them's not right, whether it's autonomy because managers aren't prepared to give people control, or it's mastery because we're not prepared to invest in people. We just want them to do the same thing over and over again, and it feels a little boring. Or it's purpose because we don't talk about it. We're more focused in the what than the why of what we do. Where you see that playing out, what do managers do? They go back to this older style of motivation of carrot and stick. So they start putting in incentives and punishments to try and control behavior, which kind of works for a while, but it doesn't drive that deeper connection to what people are doing. The problem with carrot and stick, it's a bit like, when you're walking the donkey in the original explanation, is you've got to walk beside it with a stick at one end and a carrot on a rod at the other. And the second you sit down and have a rest, donkey sits down too.
Absolutely. So, okay, so summarizing this then, motivation's more complex than the carrot and the stick and the donkey example, as you've just described. But it's actually finding that sweet spot between autonomy, mastery, and purpose, competence, relatedness, however you want to describe it, but finding that sweet spot where people have got choice to decide at least some of how they go about it, the ability to stretch themselves, learn and grow in the role that they do, become more masterful, competent in terms of what they do, but aligning that to something that's relevant and important to them, and that they understand that their contribution actually does make an impact.
That's exactly it. And when those three things come together, they're going to be motivated from within, not from the manager.
Next time on The Question Is.
Well, there's a mindset shift here, isn't it? You can't manage time. That's a fallacy. But you can manage you. You can manage your choices. You can manage your outputs. You can manage what goes on the list in the first place. It's about making some choices about that and not being governed by what can I fit into the time I have available.
To find out how Thinking Focus can unlock the potential within your organization, go to www.thinkingfocus.com, where you'll discover more about the work we do, helping our clients increase productivity and enable change.